I never believed in those moments you see in movies, where time seems to slow down and the world fades away until there's just two people existing in their own little universe. I thought that was Hollywood magic, something writers invented to sell tickets and make lonely people feel like they were missing out on something that didn't actually exist. But then I met Daniel, and suddenly I understood why people spend their whole lives chasing that feeling. It started on a Tuesday, which feels almost embarrassingly mundane for something that would completely reshape my understanding of what it means to connect with another person. I was working from my apartment, which had become my entire world during those months. The pandemic had turned me into a hermit, and honestly, I'd gotten comfortable with it. No awkward small talk, no pretending to be interested in colleagues' weekend plans, no navigating the complicated dance of being a gay man in spaces that weren't always welcoming. Just me, my laptop, and an unhealthy amount of coffee. My apartment building had this weird setup where the trash chute was at the end of the hallway, and you had to actually walk down there instead of having one on each floor. I've been putting off taking out my garbage for 3 days, which I know sounds gross, but when you're living alone and barely leaving your apartment, you start to let things slide. So there I was, in sweatpants and a ratty college t-shirt that had more holes than fabric, shuffling down the hallway with a bag of trash, looking absolutely spectacular. That's when I saw him. He was standing at his door, 2 apartments down from mine, struggling with about 6 grocery bags while trying to get his key in the lock. I'd never seen him before, which was strange because I'd lived in this building for 2 years and thought I knew all my neighbors, at least by sight. He must have just moved in. The first thing I noticed was his hands. I know that sounds weird, but they were these elegant, long-fingered hands that looked like they should be playing piano or painting or doing something artistic. They were currently failing spectacularly at the simple task of unlocking a door. A bag slipped, and I watched an orange roll out and start making its way down the hallway toward me. I should have just picked up the orange, handed it to him, and gone about my day. That's what the old me would have done. But something made me walk over and say, "Need some help?" My voice came out rougher than I intended, probably because I hadn't spoken to another human being in person for about 4 days. He looked up, and I felt something shift in my chest. He had these deep brown eyes that seemed almost gold in the hallway's fluorescent lighting, and when he smiled, it was this sheepish, embarrassed grin that made him look younger than he probably was. "Is it that obvious I'm drowning here?" he asked, and his voice had this warmth to it that immediately put me at ease. I grabbed 3 of his bags, and he finally managed to get his door open. "You just move in?" I asked, following him inside. His apartment was the same layout as mine, but flipped, and it was still mostly empty except for some boxes and a mattress on the floor in what would be the bedroom. 3 days ago," he said, setting his bags on the kitchen counter. "I'm Daniel, by the way. I'd shake your hand, but—" He gestured at the grocery bags we were both still holding. "Marcus," I said, "I'm down the hall, 2 doors that way." I pointed vaguely in the direction of my apartment. We started unpacking his groceries together, which felt strangely intimate for 2 people who'd just met. He'd bought these fancy ingredients, stuff I recognized from cooking shows but had never actually purchased myself. Saffron, fresh herbs, good olive oil. "You cook?" I asked. "It's kind of my therapy," he admitted. "When life gets chaotic, I make something complicated that requires all my attention, forces me to be present, you know." He was organizing his spices as he talked, lining them up with this careful precision that made me smile. "What about you? What's your thing?" I had to think about that. I guess I don't really have a thing anymore. I used to run, but then the world shut down and I just stopped. Now I mostly work and watch Netflix and try to convince myself that ordering Thai food 3 times a week is a personality trait. He laughed, and it was this genuine, full-body laugh that made his whole face light up. "Well, if you ever want to expand your culinary horizons beyond Thai takeout, I'm always looking for someone to cook for. It's not as fun making elaborate meals just for yourself." I should have said something casual, something that left the door open without seeming too eager. Instead, I heard myself say, "I'm free tonight." The words hung in the air between us, and I immediately wanted to take them back. Too forward, too desperate, too much. But Daniel just smiled. "Tonight works. Come by around 7? I spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of mild panic. Was this a date? Was I reading too much into a neighbor being friendly? I'd been isolated for so long that I couldn't trust my own judgment about social situations anymore. I changed my outfit 4 times, trying to find something that looked casual but not sloppy, like I'd made an effort, but not too much effort. I finally settled on dark jeans and a green button-down that my sister had once told me brought out my eyes, whatever that meant. At 6:58, I stood outside my apartment door, having an internal debate about whether showing up early was keen or desperate. At 7 exactly, I knocked on Daniel's door. He answered wearing an apron that said, "Kiss the Cook," with a cartoon chef on it, and he looked embarrassed. "My mom gave me this as a joke, but it's actually the only apron I own," he explained. His apartment smelled incredible, like garlic and butter and fresh bread. He'd set up a card table in the living room with a tablecloth and actual candles. "I know it's not much," he said, gesturing around at the sparse space. "Most of my furniture is still in storage until I figure out if I'm staying in the city long term." "Where are you from?" I asked, settling into one of the 2 folding chairs he'd set up. "Small town in Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and being different isn't exactly celebrated." There was a weight to how he said it, a shared understanding that passed between us without needing further explanation. "I came here for grad school 3 years ago, and I've been trying to figure out if I'm a city person or if I'm just hiding." I understood that feeling more than I wanted to admit. "What are you studying?" "Architecture. I'm finishing up my thesis on adaptive reuse of industrial spaces." He brought over 2 plates, and I was stunned by what he'd made. It looked like something from a restaurant, this beautiful arrangement of pan-seared fish with roasted vegetables and some kind of sauce that had been artfully drizzled across the plate. "I wanted to impress you," he admitted, sitting down across from me, "so I might have gone a little overboard." That honesty, that vulnerability, it did something to me. We'd known each other for maybe 6 hours total, and he was already being more real with me than most people I'd known for years. "Well, it's working," I said. "I'm very impressed." We talked through dinner, and it was the kind of conversation where you lose track of time because you're so engaged. He told me about growing up in a town where the biggest entertainment was the Friday night high school football games, about knowing he was different from the time he was 12, but not having the language or framework to understand what that meant. About his first boyfriend in college, who'd broken his heart by going back into the closet after graduation because he couldn't face disappointing his family. About coming to the city and feeling simultaneously liberated and terrified by how big and anonymous it all was. I told him about my own journey, about coming out to my parents in my early 20s and having it go better than I'd feared, but not as well as I'd hoped. About the way my dad still couldn't quite meet my eyes when I talked about dating. About my mom who was supportive, but in this performative way that somehow felt worse than rejection. About building a life in the city that felt authentic, but also lonely. About having plenty of acquaintances, but very few real friends. "I think that's the trade-off of being visible," Daniel said, refilling our wine glasses. "In a small town, you have to hide to survive, but everyone knows you, really knows you, even if they don't know the real you. In the city, you can be yourself, but you're surrounded by millions of people, and somehow more alone than ever." After dinner, we moved to the floor, sitting with our backs against his couch, which was still wrapped in plastic from the movers. He put on music, some indie artist I'd never heard of, and we kept talking about everything and nothing, about our dreams and fears, about the books we loved and the movies that made us cry, about our theories on why the pandemic had hit our generation so hard emotionally. At some point, our knees touched, and neither of us moved away. The touch was electric, this small point of contact that seemed to carry enormous weight. I became hyper-aware of every breath, every small movement. The space between us felt charged with possibility. "Can I tell you something?" Daniel asked, his voice softer now. "When I saw you in the hallway today, I'd been trying to work up the courage to knock on your door for 3 days. I'd seen you a few times, and I kept thinking of excuses to introduce myself, but they all seemed so transparent." My heart was pounding. "So you engineered a grocery bag crisis?" He laughed. "No, that was genuine incompetence, but I was glad for it." He turned to look at me, and we were so close I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I've been lonely for a long time, Marcus. Not just pandemic lonely, but that deeper kind of lonely, where you're surrounded by people, but don't feel truly seen by any of them. And then I have one conversation with you, and I feel more connected than I have in years. Is that crazy? If it is, we're both crazy, I said. I feel it too. I don't know who moved first. Maybe we both did, meeting in the middle. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, a question being asked. Then it deepened, and I felt like I was falling and being caught at the same time. His hand came up to cup my face, his thumb brushing my cheekbone, and I thought about how I'd noticed his hands first, how I'd been right, that they were meant for creating beautiful things. We stayed like that for a while, kissing on the floor of his mostly empty apartment, the candles burning down on the card table, the music playing songs about longing and connection. It felt like the beginning of something, like standing on the edge of a cliff and deciding to jump, trusting that there would be something to catch you. Eventually, we pulled apart, both breathing hard. I should probably go, I said, even though it was the last thing I wanted to do. It's late, and you probably have things to do tomorrow. I don't want you to leave, Daniel admitted, but I also don't want to rush this, whatever this is. I understood what he meant. This felt important, fragile, like something that needed to be handled with care. I'm literally 2 doors down, I reminded him. Not exactly a long-distance situation. He walked me to the door, and we stood there in that awkward space where you don't want to say goodbye, but don't know how to prolong the moment. I stepped into the hallway, turned to say goodnight, and that's when it happened. The moment that would replay in my mind 1,000 times over the next few days. Daniel started walking backward down the hallway, his eyes locked on mine. He was smiling, this soft, almost wondering smile, like he couldn't quite believe what was happening either. He kept walking backward, slowly, his hands in his pockets, and he didn't look away. Not once. He walked past the trash chute, past the elevator, all the way to where the hallway turned, and only then did he stop. "Good night, Marcus," he called out, his voice echoing slightly in the empty corridor. "Good night, Daniel," I called back. He stood there for another moment, just looking at me, and then he smiled again and disappeared around the corner. I heard his footsteps, heard his door open and close, and I stood there in the hallway feeling like my entire world had shifted on its axis. I barely slept that night. I kept replaying everything, the conversation, the kiss, the way he'd walked backward because he didn't want to stop seeing me. It felt like something out of a movie, except it was real, and it was happening to me. I'd spent so long protecting myself, keeping people at arm's length, convinced that real connection was something other people experienced, but not me. And now, here was this person who'd appeared in my life completely unexpectedly, and everything felt different. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It was on nice paper, the kind you buy at a stationery store, and the handwriting was this elegant script that matched everything else about Daniel. It said, "Thank you for last night. I haven't felt that comfortable with someone in longer than I can remember. Coffee later, your place this time. I want to see how you live. Daniel." I smiled so hard my face hurt. I texted him, "Come over at 10. Fair warning, my place is nowhere near as organized as yours." He showed up at exactly 10 o'clock with 2 cups of fancy coffee from the place 3 blocks over that I'd always meant to try, but never had. He'd remembered how I took my coffee from watching me add cream and sugar at his place the night before. That small attention to detail, that care, it meant everything. My apartment was definitely more lived in than his. Books everywhere, a blanket permanently draped over my couch, dishes in the sink that I quickly tried to hide when I heard him knock. "Sorry about the mess," I said, letting him in. I wasn't expecting company when I moved in 2 years ago, and I never quite adjusted my habits. "I like it," he said, looking around with genuine interest. "It feels like someone actually lives here. My place still looks like a hotel room." He walked over to my bookshelf, running his fingers along the spines. "You have good taste. I've read about half of these." We spent the morning talking, drinking coffee, existing in that easy space that usually takes months to develop with someone, but somehow already existed between us. He told me more about his thesis, about his vision for transforming abandoned factories into community spaces, about his belief that architecture should serve people rather than the other way around. I told him about my work in marketing, which felt boring by comparison, but he listened like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever heard. "You're good at understanding what people want," he observed. "That's not a small thing. Most people go through life never really seeing others, never really understanding what drives them." "Is that what you think you do? Really see people?" He considered this. "I try to. I think that's what drew me to architecture. It's not just about buildings. It's about understanding how people move through space, what makes them feel safe or inspired or connected. Every design choice is really a choice about human experience." I loved the way he thought about things, the depth he brought to conversations. We talked until afternoon, until we were both hungry and realized we'd missed lunch. We ordered pizza, and when it arrived, we ate it sitting on my living room floor because it felt right, because we'd sat on his floor the night before, and it had become our thing already. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a rhythm. Most evenings, one of us would knock on the other's door, and we'd spend hours together. Sometimes he'd cook elaborate meals while I watched and tried to help, usually making things worse until he'd laugh and gently redirect me to tasks I couldn't mess up, like setting the table or opening wine. Sometimes we'd order takeout and watch movies, his head on my shoulder, my arm around him, both of us pretending to pay attention to the screen while really just being aware of each other's presence. We talked about everything, our childhoods, our hopes for the future, our fears and insecurities. He told me about his struggle with anxiety, how sometimes his brain would spiral into worst-case scenarios and he'd have to talk himself down. I told him about my own battles with depression, how some days it was a victory just to get out of bed and pretend to be functional. We shared our scars, literal and figurative, and neither of us flinched. The physical side of our relationship developed slowly, carefully. We kissed often, these long, deep kisses that felt like conversations in themselves. We'd fall asleep on each other's couches, wrapped around each other, waking up with stiff necks and not caring. But we didn't rush toward anything more, both of us understanding, without saying it, that this was too important to treat carelessly. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," Daniel admitted one night. We were in his apartment, which was finally starting to look lived in. He'd gotten furniture, hung pictures, made it a home. Like, this is too good, too easy, and something has to go wrong. "I know what you mean," I said. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and realize I imagined all of this, that you're going to suddenly realize I'm not as interesting as you thought, or that this was just pandemic loneliness and once the world opens back up, you'll want something different." He took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. "Marcus, look at me." I did. "This isn't pandemic loneliness. This isn't me settling or making do. This is me finding something I didn't even know I was looking for. You make me want to be brave. You make me want to stop hiding, stop waiting for life to happen and actually live it." I felt tears prick my eyes. "You do the same for me. Before you, I was just going through the motions, telling myself I was fine with being alone because I'd been hurt before, and it was easier to not try. But you make me want to try. You make me believe that maybe I deserve something good." "You deserve everything good," he said fiercely, "and I want to be the person who gives it to you." That night, we finally crossed the threshold we'd been dancing around for weeks. It was tender and awkward and perfect, full of whispered questions and gentle reassurances. Afterward, lying in his bed with the city lights filtering through the window, I felt more at peace than I had in years. His head was on my chest, his arm draped across my stomach, and I could feel his breath evening out as he started to fall asleep. "Hey," I whispered. "You awake?" Barely," he murmured. "I love you," I said. The words came out before I could second-guess them, before fear could make me take them back. He lifted his head, looking at me in the dim light. "Say it again." "I love you, Daniel." He smiled, that same wondering smile from the first night. "I love you too. I have for weeks, but I was scared to say it, scared it was too soon, scared I'd scare you away." "I'm not going anywhere," I promised. "I'm right here." And I was. We both were. Two people who'd been lonely in their own ways, who'd built walls to protect themselves, who'd almost given up on finding this kind of connection. We'd found each other in the most ordinary way, in an apartment building hallway over a dropped orange, and somehow that ordinary moment had transformed into something extraordinary. Sometimes I still think about that first night, about Daniel walking backward down the hallway because he didn't want to stop seeing me. It was such a small gesture, but it contained everything that would come to define us. The unwillingness to let go, the desire to hold on to every moment, the understanding that what we'd found was rare and precious and worth fighting for. Life isn't a movie, not really. But sometimes, if you're lucky, you get moments that feel like they could be. Moments where the world narrows down to just two people, where time seems to slow, where everything else fades into the background. I got one of those moments in a hallway with a man walking backward, smiling at me like I was something worth seeing. And every day since, I've been grateful for that dropped orange, for that moment of courage that led me to offer help, for every choice that brought us to each other. We're still here, still two doors apart, but spending most nights together, still learning each other, still choosing each other every day. And sometimes, when one of us leaves the other's apartment, we walk backward down that hallway, smiling, not wanting to stop seeing each other. It's become our thing, our private language, our way of saying, without words, I see you, I choose you, I'm not ready for this moment to end.